Was this legitimate or was this lawfare?
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding.
That was Special Counsel Jack Smith almost exactly 2 years ago. He led 2 of the 4 Trump criminal cases. That indictment related to allegations stemming from the 2020 election and the January 2021 Capitol riot, accusing the president of trying to undo the results of his loss to Joe Biden. 2 months earlier in 2023, Special Counsel Smith got another indictment in the classified documents investigation. Ultimately, both of the cases were dropped or dismissed after President Trump's 2024 election victory. Now, he called all the cases against him witch hunts designed to undermine his campaign. Well, now the government's Office of Special Counsel, which actually has nothing to do with special counsels appointed to investigate by the Justice Department, has opened a probe into if Jack Smith violated the Hatch Act, which bars government employees from taking part in political activities. And a former Trump lawyer thinks it's justified.
I guess I would say sadly, yes. I think a lot of us don't want to endlessly be looking backwards. We don't want to endlessly be appointing lawyers to judge the conduct of other lawyers. And so I don't kind of reach that conclusion lightly.
Jim Trusty was a Trump attorney during the Jack Smith investigations until just before those indictments. He's also a former federal prosecutor.
I think that we kind of owe it to not just President Trump, but we owe it to society, to the country, to have a very clear-eyed assessment of all the things that took place.
Now, the Senator Tom Cotton, Republican, he sort of led the charge here of wanting the Office of Special Counsel to do this investigation, and he claims that Smith unlawfully took political actions to influence the 2024 election and harm then-candidate President Donald Trump. He's appointed special counsel. He is tasked with investigating the former president. By that nature alone, is that an attempt to undermine him?
Right. I mean, by definition, if you're lawfully appointed and you are asked to look into crimes, then it seems that doesn't necessarily lead to the conclusion that's been reached here. I look at it not so much as the back end conclusion that he seems to be reaching, but I look at the treatment of President Trump, the treatment of witnesses, the use of the grand jury, the destruction of privileges like attorney-client privilege and executive privilege. I think those are kind of the nuts and bolts that need to be looked at and compared to any other high-profile public integrity investigation. I think that most reasonable people, if they really knew all those vivid details, would say that this was an abusive prosecution. Whether it was designed to affect elections is a tougher question, but I would point to one thing, and that is when Jack Smith was in front of Judge Chutkan on the January 6th case in D.C., they, and mostly Jack, but with the complicity of the judge in a sense, pushed very, very hard to try that case at an early juncture, at a much earlier time than any other similar case would have gone to trial. You had a non-violent defendant who was not incarcerated, who was waiving speedy trial rights, and you had an overlay of classified information that typically slows cases down by at least like a year. So that's a case that in the normal track probably would have taken 2 to 3 or even 4 years before it went to trial. And in this case, Jack Smith was pushing hard, saying the public has a right to a speedy trial, which is a very academic and very limited notion. And I thought that was a tell, to use a gambling term. That was basically saying this is not a transparent and honest and open prosecution, but this is something that's trying to affect the political scene.
Now, you had left as a Trump attorney right before the first indictment in the classified documents case. The one related to the 2020 election came a little less than 2 months later. So you had worked on both of these. You talked about the heavy-handed tactics. What can you tell us that was out of the norm?
Look, the executive privilege was something that the Biden administration announced would not apply to President Trump. They tried to put their fingers on the scale early on, and something that's very destructive for the presidency. The idea of the privilege is that the president should be allowed to have unfettered uncensored conversations with his senior advisors on important issues. We want the president to not feel like there's a tape recorder rolling every time he talks to the vice president or somebody else. That's a privilege that can be overtaken in some circumstances. In this case, without getting into sealed testimony, I can just tell you it was a very difficult thing to litigate from our perspective. There was an awful lot that was being presented to the court without the defense being able to see it, and the executive privilege was completely blown open. It became a major part of the speaking indictment, of the January 6th indictment. There was an awful lot of stuff that came directly from people like Mike Pence. Similarly, on the Mar-a-Lago case, they blew open, again, a rare thing, not totally unheard of, but unusual, blew open attorney-client privilege, and a lot of the conversations in the early stages of the document retrieval process between the lawyer for President Trump and himself, actually two lawyers, but primarily one of them, that became public information, and it became a huge part of that indictment. You want to see a process that's familiar with every case, and not something where it seems like the prosecution's straining to both make up crimes and abuse the process to get evidence they wouldn't normally have. So I think the destruction of those privileges was a pretty bad thing. The other thing from the Mar-a-Lago side, we were in touch with an awful lot of people that worked at Mar-a-Lago, and I'm talking not just people that might be involved in security or the Secret Service detail, but all the way down to house cleaning. And these folks were being told, sit down and talk with us, or you're going to have to fly up to Washington on Friday. Give us the password to your laptop computer that, by the way, you don't own, but the Trump organization owns. Give that to us today, or we're just going to force you to give it to us at grand jury. We were getting backstories over and over and over again of people that are, in a lot of cases, kind of unsophisticated, just nice, salt of the earth people being threatened with trips within 2 days, with no courtesy extended to them at all, with multiple layers of interviews, with snide and kind of mocking conversations during the interviews coming from the agents and the prosecutors. So I heard enough there to know this is unlike almost any other prosecution I had seen in my 35 years.
So you've never seen anything like that? I mean, it seems that the government would try to coerce people to try to talk in there in probes.
I've seen heavy-handed approaches for sure. And but here's the thing, and people forget this. Prosecutors, and look, I did it for 27 years at both state and federal level. Prosecutors are supposed to be seeking justice, small j justice, not Department of Justice. And I think that in a lot of special counsel situations, you could hear this from really both sides of the political aisle. There seems to be kind of a preordained, they have to charge somebody or it was a failed appointment. I think that Jack's team and Jay Bratt and some of the attorneys that were involved, not all, but a good chunk of them, very much saw this as a kind of measure of self-righteousness, that they knew in their heart of hearts that President Trump was a bad person, so they were going to find ways to hook him into federal charges. And that's just the wrong, it's wrong on a couple of levels, wrong about him being a bad person, but it's also wrong on the notion of, I have the man, let's find the crime. And I've seen moments of bad prosecution judgment. I've disagreed with prosecutors vehemently on how they characterize something. But at the end of the day, this was sustained. It was historically significant. And it was something where I think you can't just chalk it up to negligence or mistake. There was a lot of really bad misconduct.
Now, Jack Smith's no longer a government employee. The Office of Special Counsel is not investigating this as a criminal matter. What could actually happen to him then, even if they found that he violated the Hatch Act and was political in going after former President Trump at the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I know. I mean, I think that they could presumably make some sort of referral for potential prosecution. And I mean, frankly, that's not really my primary concern here, is whether or not there's going to be trials of former prosecutors or people getting fired. I mean, a good number of folks kind of quit to get out of the scrutiny of the Office of Professional Responsibility. When OPR for the Department of Justice does an investigation, number one, it's a little bit inherently limited in terms of what they can access. They're not running around doing search warrants or getting into your personal phones. But number two, the only sanction that they could come up with on the high end would be firing. And so if you quit while an OPR investigation is just beginning, you basically benefit from never having received that scrutiny at all.
Now, the Justice Department also has what's called a weaponization working group, and they're reviewing former Special Counsel Smith and his team. You talked about you don't love to go back to the past and go after past lawyers in these cases, but do you think there was enough politicization, if I can get the word out, if there was enough of that to warrant this kind of a probe into Jack Smith?
Yeah, I think that's why we all go with weaponization, because it's so hard to always say politicization.
Yes, it is hard.
But look, I point to a couple of things that I think are worthy of serious attention, and I kind of defer to others as somebody who is inside all this, whether it necessarily leads to some sort of criminal charge. We had a very credible report from a very well-established, very well-respected attorney in Washington, D.C., who was kind of part of our collective team of lawyers dealing with Mar-a-Lago. And he told a story, filed a sworn affidavit describing how Jay Bratt, in the presence of other prosecutors, essentially, you can call it extorted, you can call it bribed, but dangled a federal judgeship in front of him in his representation of a right-hand man to Donald Trump, and said, I'd hate to see you blow this. I'd hate to see you not get this judgeship. You need to make your guy cooperate. I mean, that is literally, in one of the most important cases in our history, a moment of federal obstruction by a federal prosecutor witnessed by 5 or 6 others. And what I found particularly maddening about that scenario, and of course, Jack Smith and company denied it. Oh, we're not that stupid. We wouldn't do something like that. I have to tell you that I thought the ring of truth landed on the side of this attorney, that it was credible, that he swore to it. And what's frustrating is there has never been, to my knowledge, an investigation into that in any deep level. And there was never anything where text messages or emails on either public devices or private devices were collected to see if people talked both before and after that incident about what they had seen. You know, if there's 5 or 6 prosecutors in the room, I'd expect some of them said either, what the heck did Jay just say? Or wasn't that great the way he threatened this attorney? And that, to me, I mean, that's just not tolerable even in the smallest of cases. But in something this significant, if that's the type of thing that a weaponization committee is going to look at, I say God bless him. It needs a hard look.
Jim Trusty, former federal prosecutor, former Trump attorney in the investigations that led up to indictments before the 2024 election. Great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good talking.